Welcome to the podcast, Chris Graham and Rod Mullins, and we're going to talk some NASCAR news. We've been talking about this, Rod, a good bit the last few months. The news about NASCAR and team owners and charters, and we finally got some word late last week that, except for a couple of notable exceptions, NASCAR has made an agreement with team owners. Take us into this. I guess we'll start with the guys who signed, the teams who signed. This is development for NASCAR, but then I guess the teams who didn't sign, notable. This isn't resolved yet. Let's just say.
No, it's not resolved yet. And the prediction was made that by the time they got into Atlanta, that a lot of these teams would go ahead and sign this and would agree to this because they didn't want it dragging them down by the time the playoffs rolled around. Well, the playoffs are here, they've started, and you've got two teams that imposed a deadline themselves that they're not going to sign it until they get some things straightened out. And that's 2311 Motorsports, 2311 Racing with Michael Jordan, and also with Denny Hamlin, and then Front Row Motorsports. Those are the two, which they're not commenting on this, the way that they're going with it. They're just saying that they decided not to meet a NASCAR imposed deadline. As a matter of fact, the statement that came out from 2311 was this: they have decided not to meet a NASCAR imposed deadline to sign charter agreements for their two cars for the 2025 through 2031 seasons. 2311's position, as stated in a letter to NASCAR, is that we did not have an opportunity to fairly bargain for a new charter contract. Now, I don't know where that comes from with it. Denny Hamlin, I'm sure, will, fill us all in on Actions Detrimental podcast is what he's good for with Dirty Mo Media. But they notified NASCAR what issues needed to be addressed in writing at the deadline, and they're interested in engaging constructive discussions with NASCAR to address these issues and move forward in a way that comes to a fair resolution while strengthening the sport that they say that everyone loves. Now, here's the deal. From what I understand is some of the sticking points right now at this point is that the France family could own so many charters, and the France family could go and say, we're going to enter three or four cars and we're going to race them. Well, how do you do that? How do you say that you are the National Association for Stock Car Racing, and then yet you run your own cars? You've got all these teams and everything. It's sort of like a dictatorship. It's sort of like what it is. You're going to let everybody else run, but you're going to have all the money. You're going to have the charters. You're going to have all this stuff, and you're going to dominate. And then if you dominate, guess where the money goes? The money's going to be funneled back into the company. There's some people that are not happy with that whatsoever. And, I kind of agree with that. I think that the France family, while they are hoping to hold things together and keep this, I guess, fair for everyone else. It's not fair. It's not fair all the way around. And I'd also heard too that it was more of a money grab this time around by NASCAR. This latest development, more so. I think one of the teams right now had been talking that if the one of the agreements was going to be something like $5 million for just a charter itself, could be as high as $8.8 million for a charter. And you're talking about a team or teams that are trying to come into this sport. And like we have talked about already before, how many millions of dollars does it take for a team to run week in and week out, 36 races in the season, and then expect to make their money back on a charter, one, for example, and then also being treated fairly along the line by NASCAR and the way that they do things. One complaint about that, Richard Childress. Richard Childress could complain all he wants to about it, and he can complain right now, but there is some kind of stipulation also that NASCAR wants them to kind of hold back on their criticism about things. Well, if the sport has problems, then we've got to find out what the problems are.
Yeah. Yeah, the non-disparagement clause is one thing.
Yeah. Mhm.
I found some quotes from Denny Hamlin. So he talked about the non-disparagement clause being a deal breaker for him in 2311. There's a really good long quote here, and I just want to share it. He said now this isn't a quote, it's a paraphrase from the AP article that I found. The article says he being Hamlin thinks NASCAR is in for a surprise if it starts seizing charters and goes into 2025 without an agreement. Now, here's the quote. I think it's more than just frustration of a lack of acknowledgement that the teams have built this sport. Hendrick and Gibbs putting superstars on a racetrack. That's what built the sport. Fans
Mhm.
don't come to see the cars going around in circles. If they would, we would sell out NASCAR, or, excuse me, ARCA races, but they don't. They come to sell out on Sunday to watch Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson and Kyle Busch. Who provides the cars? That's the team. Who spends the money? That's the teams. Who sponsors go buy a suite? That's the teams. Who sponsors activate in their bidways? That's the teams. That's the tough part of it. They just don't value us. Those are fighting words.
Yeah, I mean they are. And then I read an article too from Jerry Jordan with kickingthetires.com, and he and I've gotten to be friends. And he put an article up this past weekend that I've been reading, and I'm like, still, Front Row Motorsports, they're not commenting on anything of the charter discussions at this time. Denny Hamlin, on the other hand, like you just read and said, hey, those are fighting words. But here's the thing: multiple drivers who spoke with Kicking the Tires on the condition of anonymity, or if I could say it right, said that they weren't pleased that the teams, what the teams had, NASCAR had offered. They weren't pleased with it at all, saying that they didn't feel like they had a lot of choice in the matter and that NASCAR really didn't negotiate with the teams.
Right.
Plus, on top of that, the other hangups include how it was dealt of how much money or how much the recent $7.7 billion TV deal that NASCAR signed with broadcasters, as well as other issues like the length NASCAR will honor team charters. That's another hangup right there. It's reported that NASCAR did relent somewhat on the amount of money it was willing to share with race teams, but there's still hangups on whether the charters could be made permanent for the teams. Okay. So the teams want reassurance from NASCAR that they won't revoke the charters in the future and leave teams high and dry after investing millions in the sport. And so this has been going on back and forth for 2 years, and it's been smoldering. And now Denny Hamlin adds to the fire once again, like he does with a lot of stuff, and throws
Yeah.
in his 2 cents worth. But can you really blame him, though? I
He's
mean, can
right.
you
Yeah.
blame him in this case?
Yeah. I have made myself like a very amateur student of sports, professional sports, and labor unions in professional sports over the years. I've read a lot about and studied a lot about baseball was the forerunner here. Baseball, back in the 60s and into the 70s, the MLBPA, the Major League Baseball Players Association, was the first to, they won free agency for players. The NFL came along a lot later. The NBA eventually came along as well, and now other sports leagues. I mean, basically, that's the model for every other sports league um, in North America and across the world. NASCAR, we've talked about this, is just it's so late to the game. It's a family-run business,
Mhm.
and I think Hamlin said on his podcast. The France family's always had the opinion that if you don't want to play by our rules, you just don't have to play in our sport.
Right.
Uh, but to my perspective on this is it's the same as with baseball owners back in the 60s when they were fighting the still emerging labor union movement back then. I think the France family is overestimating the value of the NASCAR name and underestimating kind of what Hamlin said there. We don't go out to, we don't watch cars going around in circles. I mean, like he said,
Right.
they'd sell at ARCA races. You know, the ratings for Xfinity versus the ratings for the Cup Series are an example of that too. Um, we do want to watch the stars, and to get the stars to be able to run every week, and it's a roughly $40 million plus a year to keep a car on the track for all the races in a season. It takes a lot of work on the part of those teams. NASCAR doesn't do anything to help those teams, and it just makes sense. The NFL distributes money to all the 32 teams. MLB gives money to all the 30 teams, et cetera, across the sports. And NASCAR acts like, all right, we'll provide the track, and then you figure everything else out on your own. And if you don't like it, don't do it. That's a really backwards attitude.
Yeah, it is. And it reminds me sort of here several years ago that when we started seeing all these tracks being bought up by Bruton Smith and Speedway Motorsports, there was talk at one point of whether or not NASCAR would split. down the middle because you had International Speedway Corporation, which is held by the France family. They own NASCAR. They've got NASCAR. They've got the tracks with Daytona, Talladega. Martinsville's got a, tie in with that too. And then all these other tracks that they have controlling interest in. And then you've got Speedway Motorsports. And a lot of people thought at one point, Bruton Smith was like, hey, folks come for the entertainment. They come for the entertainment of watching these races and stuff, and they want to be treated as such. And hey, all this stuff with, the money, the expensive charters and everything else, it's just another example of what's going on even in our economy right now as it goes. Because can you really afford to take a family of four to a NASCAR race anymore? And I would say no, it's hard. I mean, you can get the tickets at a good price. You might be able to get the tickets to be able to watch the race. But here's the deal: food, concessions, everything else is so outrageous. And I don't mean that bad. It's just it's expensive. I mean, when you pop down enough money, it's like going to the entertainment places like to Universal Studios or Disney World or places like that. Um, I never expected in my lifetime years ago having to go and pay something like $4 or $5 for water. That kind of just freaked me out. And so from that point on, I learned, well, let's just buy one of those big water containers and then fill it up with cold water, find a place and fill it up and keep on filling it up the entire time. Saved us some money out of it, I'll tell you that much. But still, NASCAR hasn't learned that they need to try to save some money out of this
Well, and
and quit trying to be the cherry picker.
what's so interesting too is, okay, so if you're the NFL, you can charge whatever you want because most of the games are sold out.
Mm-hmm.
And not just sold out, there's waiting. Most teams have waiting lists for tickets.
Right.
Baseball, it doesn't quite have that problem, but I mean, it's making enough money, and NBA, a lot of those teams have waiting lists. Most of your favorite college football teams and college basketball teams. I know, I'm a UVA basketball fan. To get good seats at a UVA basketball game and get those season tickets, the waiting list is years long.
Oh yeah.
NASCAR does not have that issue right now. Most of their tracks have lots of empty seats. And so if the market says you're charging, that's one way the market's saying you're charging too much.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you brought there's lots of people watching on TV. There's plenty of people watching NASCAR races at home that if the cost wasn't so much to go to the track, they'd go to Richmond. Richmond wouldn't lose one of its two races of the year because it would be cost efficient enough for you to go to the races. And so, yeah, you hit on a great point there, and I think that's just dumb business on the part, more dumb business on the part of NASCAR.
Well, and I don't know why, I don't know how it's gotten to this point. I don't understand how it's gotten to this point because it looks like a unified front. At least when you're watching it on TV, you're watching it, you might be there at the races and so forth, but you can see the discourse. You can see some of it with the way things are. And, Richard Childress, again, I alluded to this earlier about Richard Childress talking about things. He was complaining a little bit about this thing of, the $1 million fine or the millions of dollars of fines and so forth after what happened with Austin Dillon. It's like, hey, you're ruining the sport is what you're doing. You go out and you tell people, hey, let's race, let's have at it. However, Denny Hamlin and some of the other drivers are out there and they're like, hey, people don't pay money to go see wrecks on the racetrack. I beg to differ sometimes. A lot of them, that's what they love to do. They love to go and watch and see who's going to knock so and so out, and then that they were there to capture the moment of it. That's some of it. But Richard Childress made a point and stuff. He says you're almost to the point of pricing yourself out of the ballpark, so to speak, with this, and it's going to jeopardize the rest of the teams on down the line. And there are people that complain and say that he's not much of a team owner and so forth. But Richard Childress has been around for a long time. He's been around for a very long time. And if this is the way that you treat your older teams with this charter deal, then you're not going to have anybody around. Because these are the teams that made your sport. These are the teams that have helped make the sport more popular, and now you're just essentially slapping them in the face and saying you do what we tell you to do and just be quiet about it. Don't say anything else.
So
So
we
it
got
doesn't work that way.
We got a bunch of teams that signed. Most of the people who did that are saying anonymously that they felt pressured to do so.
Yep.
We got two teams that didn't. At least one of those co-owners is very public about how he doesn't want to do so. I don't know. I mean, I guess as we're wrapping up the podcast here, Rod, I don't know that we can say that this is going to get resolved anytime soon.
I don't think so either. And Michael Jordan is even,
Yeah.
I mean, besides Denny Hamlin, Michael Jordan is in on this thing too. And when Michael Jordan is talking about this and he talks about what's best for his race team, hey, you better stand up and take notice because I mean, this is the man that has not done well with basketball franchises in Charlotte, with the Hornets, Bobcats, whatever you want to call them, and yet he's come out smelling like a rose in this race team. Now they're looking at him and saying, "Look at this, Michael Jordan. He's touched and he's made gold out of this racing team." But the struggles continue, and he sees the struggles week in and week out. It's not just easy to win every week. You've got to work, and then you've also got to have the money. And he knows that. And what was it he said? I think a couple of years ago or something about Bubba Wallace and stuff. Bubba Wallace made the comment. He said, "Yeah," he said, "I know who signs the paychecks." And he says, if I don't do what the man tells me to do about signing the paychecks, I'm going to be going somewhere else before it's over with. So, I mean, it just explains it all.
Even when Michael Jordan wasn't winning and his teams in Charlotte in the NBA didn't win,
Mm-hmm.
the value of the franchise went up substantially while he owned the team, and he made money with the Charlotte NBA team. He's even with success on the track in NASCAR, he ain't making money in NASCAR,
Right.
and that's probably what's frustrating him the most is that you can own an NBA franchise and you can make money no matter what you do, but you can even be really good in NASCAR and not make money. That's not good for the teams that are involved.
Well, and this kind of goes back to you had an article that's on AFP right now talking about James Madison University, and I've just gazed at a little bit of it. These teams, and we're not talking NASCAR primarily with this, but this is just the image thing. Here you've got Appalachian State, James Madison, who has jumped from the one AA ranks, and they've gone into the Division One ranks, into the bowl, championship series. Um, I just don't understand it. I mean, did James Madison think that they were going to be making bukus of money once they got into the Division One status and stuff? Hey, they're going to have to pay their dues, is what they're going to end up having to do. And a lot of people are going to still be reluctant about, how to deal with this team coming into it. And, oh, they've been a one AA team for so long. But yeah, the money thing right now about making money goes back to the thing about UVA too. Hey, what's the big campaign coming up at UVA? I think this week they're wanting to sell it out. They're wanting to go. I'm going to cross my fingers, going to cross my toes on that one. But I don't know if they'll sell it out or not. It's you got to be. I don't know. You got to be on top of things a little bit better than the way that they are right now. And NASCAR is feeling the heat on that as well.
As much as I complain, and I do a lot about UVA athletics not making enough money, the football program profited $20 million last year with a three-win team. JMU has been to bowls each of the last 2 years, their first 2 years in the bowl subdivision, as you mentioned. They lose $7 million a year. So, that's economic money makes the world go round. Follow the money is the answer. That was what we heard in the Nixon investigation, right? Follow the money.
Hey, but
And
you could
that's
be like Northern Illinois and go and play Notre Dame and then get paid 1.4 million and you
yeah.
beat Notre Dame on their own home field. That's probably enough to help them out a little bit on losing
But
some
as
money.
I but I mentioned that in the context of that JMU football story. They played at UVA last year, won the game. But even more important to JMU than winning the game was that they got $550,000.
Yeah.
They didn't get nearly as much as Northern Illinois got to play Notre Dame, but they
Wow.
got $550,000. And when you're losing $7 million a year, because they had $4 million in revenues, 11+ million in expenses the JMU football program had in
Yep.
2022. When you're losing that much money, that check, you win the game, whatever, that's great. But the money, let's make sure the check clears.
Well, and this goes all the way down to Division II and Division III football too. I mean, you got programs right now that just because football is the perceived money maker, if it's not making any money, they're going to go and they're going to cut it off here before
Yeah.
it's all said and done. I don't want to see that happen with James Madison. They did it with East Tennessee State. They said it was like we're hemorrhaging money, and I don't know if East Tennessee State is hemorrhaging money now the way that they used to. But gosh, I mean, they've got a brand new stadium, that's been open now for the last several years. Really nice. They had a great indoor stadium that they just said, no, it doesn't feel like football here. So they go back to the outdoor thing. And, they've had some top name coaches in there too. They had Carl Torbush in there, North Carolina alum, played at Carson Newman, and then he coached at UNC. And then you had Randy Sanders, former quarterback at Tennessee. He coached just about everywhere else, including Florida State, who doesn't have a home probably if all's said and done by the ACC. If they decide to leave, I don't know if they're going to have a home. They may have the Hobo League before it's over with.
They may want to.
They
They
may have
may
to
have to
join.
sue. They may have to sue their way back into the ACC the way they're playing right now.
Yeah, and that's why NASCAR, I'm afraid, is going to end up with this. If some of these teams don't end up putting NASCAR's feet to the fire, they could end up just, I don't know, it could be almost like a traveling circus, so to speak. You just go to a track week in and week out and hope you make some money out of it.
I foresee litigation, but
Yeah.
before we see anything else with this too. So
Mhm.
that's probably a good place for us to wrap up. Well, okay, so we did another podcast on NASCAR. We talked about the racing on the track. Please listen to that as well. Read Rod's a recap. He recapped the Atlanta race for us on AFP. We got that story prominently on AFP as we're speaking right now, and we'll look forward to Watkins Glen recap as well, Rod. In the meantime, thank you for your time and your insight.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks.